Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our April SHRS Innovation Institute Innovation Seminar. We have three guests to present this month, Dr. Skidmore, Dr. Wang, and Dr. Zhou. And they're going to present something a little different than we've had in months past. They're going to talk about commercialization of a clinical tool. I think, we've talked a lot about products and other kinds of commercialization, but I think this is a little bit different flavor. So I'm really looking forward to this and seeing, learning about your three experience here, and hopefully it'll spark some other interest in this and some more commercialization of this kind of tool. So I will just turn it over to you to introduce what you're going to talk about and let you guys take it away.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Beth Skidmore, and I'm one of three people you hear from today. And today I'm speaking with my investigator hat on. The project that we're going to talk to you about started with a clinical problem that I was seeking to solve, I and my colleagues within my research lab. And then we partnered with experts in health informatics, computer science, and artificial intelligence, natural language processing, to try to tackle that problem. And now we are not yet at the level of commercialization, but we're starting to have some early conversations. So we welcome insights from the group as we move this idea forward. So I'll just start with a brief introduction to the problem. In short, we know that from lots of research that if individuals are not engaging in the rehabilitation process, benefiting from active learning, and as a result don't have the same rehabilitation outcomes as individuals who do engage more actively and are able to actively learn the strategies they're learning in clinical rehabilitation. And that's true regardless of whether you're talking about occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language pathology, audiology, any discipline that's delivering services. And so this low engagement leads to an acquired dependence and a long-term disability that is probably an attenuated slope of recovery relative to peers that can engage in the process. So I started looking at this problem specifically in individuals who have acquired brain injury and stroke. And in this case, we know that there's certain cognitive impairments that are associated with that low engagement. And so what we wanted to know is if we did intervention differently, could we improve engagement, therefore improving self-mastery and lead to greater independence and better functional outcomes over the long term? And so we started experimenting with a series of interventions, but the one that was most promising that aligned with improving engagement and rehab outcomes was an intervention called strategy training. It's not a new intervention. It's been around since the 1940s and 1950s and started in behavioral modification studies in the classroom, actually, but has been used in sports psychology, in corporate quality improvement models, and a number of models, but it's in teaching people how to better engage in a learning or a discovery process, and then applying that to, in our case, solve problems with their daily activities. And so what we found from our studies, and I'm not going to hit it at a very high level, is that we actually see that people, when we use this strategy training approach, we see people, even with people with profound cognitive impairments or individuals with depression or apathy, engage more actively in the rehab process. And as a result, we see significantly greater functional outcomes. And there are a couple of key elements that seem to be driving that. One, we have them pick activities that they want to work on in rehab that are meaningful to them. And we have a structured process for doing that. We teach them how to evaluate their own behavior and monitor their behavior as they're learning these new skills and seeking to improve their performance. We teach them one global strategy that helps them structure that learning. And then this guided problem solving piece, we take the therapist out of the role of a direct skill instructor, telling people what to do, and instead put that therapist in a role of facilitator or coach, where they work with the client to help discover or elicit their own strategies to improve their performance with daily activities. And so to illustrate that, I think video always goes a long way. This is a video I use with permission from one of our clients. She was in inpatient rehab post-stroke and is trying to do a routine task, which is standing at the sink to clean her teeth using a water pick.
All right.
Okay.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Now you know I'm already takes 2 hands to this, so I kind of have to
You take your time. And
Get over it. I'll put it on my mouth, and what you do is press this button here.
do you think you can do that?
Yeah,
Too?
I don't know. I only have one hand. If I hold this is the bad hand. If I use that way, I'd have to cross over. It's going to spray all over.
In the interest of time, I'll cut to the chase. The plug's not working in her room. As a result, there's no power. And I use this video as a good example because this is someone who's getting ready to return home alone. Her family all lives out of state, so the goal is for her to be independent. So we want to see how she problem solves problems, and one of them might be the power's not working. How does that work? And so we take this to the next level and work through the strategy, and you're going to see Emily here working through her with the strategy on what worked, what
Did we do the plan that we came up with?
Right.
Okay. So we tried to do the plan. Okay, and what worked well and what didn't work well about the plan?
Well,
What
the
happened?
electric outlet was not compatible.
Okay.
Or the table.
Sure. Did the table work well, do you think?
I think you could probably bring that up and it would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll need a, if the sink is small like that one, we'll need a table.
Yeah.
Okay,
At least
so
on the same height, I would imagine. Table
Okay.
itself.
table or shelf to hold the water pick then?
Or a sink if the size. The sink is
If it's,
big enough.
Sure, larger like this.
That would be ideal.
okay. All right. Now we have to decide what the next step is.
We're going to ask somebody
Okay,
to plug for the outside of price.
okay,
And then maybe it'll direct us to look for at least, I think the ones that are normally must be special ones.
okay. So we're gonna ask, do you have any ideas?
I think you could ask the nurse.
Okay,
That nurse.
okay,
She should be able to tell us.
sure. And are you gonna do that or am I gonna do that?
You do that. I
Me?
think
Okay.
you're free.
Sure, I will do it. I just want to check with you what the plan was.
I designate.
She designates. So I show this video because the day we met her, she was very withdrawn, lethargic, not attending to tasks, not engaging in therapy. And you see something quite different here, right? So there's something about the approach that gets folks more actively engaged. And we think that a lot of the active ingredients, in fact, our research suggests it's this guided problem solving that seems to be what's driving the change for those who have good outcomes and those who have poor outcomes. But that's a very hard thing to measure. What Emily's doing, structure that, and how we make that reliable and repeatable. So we've developed some tools to help us measure that and look at that as a potential moderator of outcome. And so we have a published fidelity assessment we've developed with a couple of different graduate students here at the University of Pittsburgh. And what we really are measuring is the degree of guided cues, the kind of cues that Emily's using to elicit information from that client and help her come up with her own solutions and try those solutions, as opposed to directed cues where we're telling people what to do. Many people are familiar with the sayings around giving fish and teaching to fish. It's the same principle here. We also looked at guided verbal cues versus guided gesture cues, so the degree to which we use nonverbal behavior to communicate versus directed behavior. And so the way we've done this in all of our clinical trials over the last 16 years is we train a very expensive rater, someone who usually has training in clinical rehabilitation, to watch 20% of our videos. For every 1 minute of video they watch, it takes them about a minute to code that information. And depending on whether we're training a new grad or a highly experienced therapist, it can be pretty costly. And so here's my next problem. How do we better understand what's going on in that interaction? We figured out a way to get at it reliably, but I can't scale that if we want to try to scale this to our 30-site pragmatic trial we're getting ready to do. It's very expensive, let alone deploying this out to clinics who want to try to deploy this approach and then evaluate their implementation of that approach. So we need a solution. And that's where I met these two fellows that you're going to hear from one day, kind of tongue in cheek. We were talking and I said, does your artificial intelligence, your natural language processing, your machine learning techniques, any way you can replace a therapist for me on this problem? And they're like, oh yeah, we can do that. That's actually not very hard. And so the clinician in me thinks this is a bit science fiction, but I think as you listen to what they present, you'll see they've come up with a pretty robust method to do this using artificial intelligence and an automated algorithm that's pretty reliable relative to my highly expensive standardized rater. And then the next question is, how do we deploy this to the world? So that's what we're working on. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Wang.
Thank you, Dr. Skidmore, for the explaining the significance of the problem. So as you can see, in order to scale up that ability of the fidelity assessment, we need some kind of automation there to automate the fidelity assessment. In the first part, I want to talk about how we leverage the natural language processing, or NLP, to analyze the language spoken by both clients and the therapist to do the automated fidelity assessment. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to train those, so I keep telling people the natural language processing or the AI techniques, they are not magic. So I have to know, what we try to do using those techniques. So that's why in the first project, we try to, develop those NLP or those AI models. But first, we need to teach them, what we are trying to extract or what we are trying to do using the data we have. So this data set, Dr. Skidmore's team have collected a lot of data sets, which are video recordings from several healthcare systems. So in this first project, we used the videos from the clinical study conducted at I believe, Encompass Hospital, Encompass Health. And we collected those videos between 2019 and 2021. And then those videos have 3 disciplines, PT, occupational physical therapy, PT, occupational therapy, OT, and speech and language therapy. And we take a subset of those videos, which are 100 videos from 36 participants. And then for those 100 videos, we split random, because it's quite, before training the model, we need to annotate those videos. By annotation means, we need to take a look at those languages spoken by those therapists and clients, and then figure out what languages is associated with, those direct cues, and what language is associated with direct guided cues. So we have to annotate those using human experts. So first, we randomly select 10 videos from each discipline, and we use that to develop the NLP system. And again, to train those in the NLP system, we use 7 videos for training, and then another 3 videos from every discipline for validation of the algorithm, because we want to know, what are the performance of those NLP systems. And on the right-hand side, you see the proportion of those videos across 3 disciplines. And next slide. So this is a method we use. So first we have those videos, but in order for us to train the NLP algorithms, we need those electronic version of those languages. So we use a technique first called the automated speech recognition, or ASR, software. We use this software to translate those spoken language into text. And then after we have the text, electronic version of the text, we analyze those text and extract the useful information using the natural language processing algorithms. Next slide, please. So in order to develop the NLP algorithms, we tried several approaches, because we don't know which approach will have the best performance. So that's why we develop 3 basic approach, actually, which is the baseline approach, rule-based NLP algorithm, and then more advanced deep learning or machine learning based approach, which is the long short-term memory LSTM NLP algorithm. And then we also used, if you heard the word large language model, we also tried the large language model, which is called a bidirectional encoder representation from transformers, or the BERT model. So if you are using ChatGPT, those large language model, they are the back-end model behind those applications. So we tried this 3 approach, and we tried to figure out, which approach could have a better performance on this problem. Next slide, please. So in order to develop this algorithm, we have adopted several approaches. First is a data-driven approach, because we want to learn the features or learn the patterns from the data we have. So in the data, first we have the transcripts converted by the software, and then we did a lot of cleaning, or we call that a pre-processing on those text data, because there are a lot of redundant text data, a lot of punctuation and necessary language in the text data. So we kind of clean those transcripts, and then we try to hire 2 fidelity assessment evaluator to annotate those clean transcripts and try to figure out what are those language associated with direct cues and guided cues. Next slide, please. So initially, we did this process in several steps. In the first step, we gave every annotator 3 documents, and we asked them to annotate those 3 documents. What are the direct cues, what are the guided cues, and then we develop an annotation guideline based on observations from the 3 documents. And through this process, actually, we found there are some disagreement between the 2 annotators in our case, and then we. After that exercise, we want those 2 annotators to reach some kind of agreement until we use this inner annotator agreement to measure the agreement between those two medical experts, and until we reach the inner annotator agreement of 0.7. Then we say, okay, they have some consensus on those annotation, and then we move to the next step, where we give them more transcript documents, and then they can annotate those transcript documents independently. Next slide, please. So after they annotate all the transcripts in the 30 videos, 10 videos each discipline, we kind of organize those data set into training and validation. In the training data set, we have 784 guided, direct, and non-cues in the training. And then in the validation data set, we have around 290 per cues for guided, directed, and non-cues in our validation data set. And we use those training data set to train the model, to train the NLP algorithm or the NLP model. And then we use the validation data set to validate the performance of those models. Next slide, please. And when we develop this rule-based NLP algorithms, we also adopt an expert-driven approach because in addition to the data-driven approach that we observe the patterns from the data, we also ask the experts in the domain what kind of conventions they use on those when they speak those guided cues or directed cues, and we also consider all those different conventions in our algorithms. And also there is already a coding scheme developed by Dr. Skidmore's team, and we also read those coding scheme and try to capture some keywords from those schema and apply that in our rule-based approach. Next slide. So those are some example keywords we got from either the expert or the data-driven approach. And in our rule-based NLP algorithm, we have some trigger words. Those trigger words are usually the word that trigger whether this is a guided cue or directed cue. And then the second column lists some examples of the language spoken by the therapist in the video. So those are some examples related to directed cues or guided cues or not cue at all. Next slide, please. And so in addition to the rule-based approach, we also want to try the deep learning approach as well as the large language model because those models has been viewed as state-of-the-art in the NLP community. And we want to test how good those models are in this project. And on the right-hand side is kind of the display what is a LSTM model and what is a BERT model. But here I want to skip the detail of those models. So, but basically, briefly, LSTM model is something that we use our training data to train this model and then test the performance on our validation data set. For the BERT model, because everybody has for those large language model actually, because training those models take a lot of computing resources. So that's why those large language model has been pre-trained by those mostly tech companies. Like BERT model is developed by Google. So they already pre-trained this model using all the corpus available in Wikipedia and all the text data on the internet. Train those models. So this model kind of embed all the language features already inside. And then we take those pre-trained model in our project and then use our training data to fine-tune the model. So this is called pre-training and fine-tuning so that the model can be more tailored to our problem. So this is a step we took for those large language models. Next slide, please. And so this is the training loss and accuracy regarding to every iteration on our dataset. So as you see, for both LSTM and BERT models, the training loss actually decrease and the training accuracy increase through every iteration on our dataset. So that means those model has been properly trained on our dataset. Next slide, please. And this is the final result. So the result is measured based on F1 score. So if you don't know F1 score, so F1 score is defined by the harmonic mean of precision and recall. So it is a metric to evaluate the overall performance of the model on a specific classification task. And here, as you see, we measured the F1 score on 3 disciplines as well as on average, and also the performance across 3 different models. And as you see here, the BERT model actually, which is a large language model, have the best performance across three disciplines. And on average, BERT model have the best performance for our problem. Next slide, please. So, and those data is the model is trained. The previous model is trained on the video we collected from Encompass Health. But we are just curious because how the model perform if we have a new video coming from another healthcare system. So that's why we want to test the generalizability of those model on the new training data. So here in this verification, we collected actually those video already collected from a prior study that was being done in UPMC. So we used those 18 video collected from UPMC to validate the model, the performance of a model. And in this case, we have around 274 guided queues, 242 direct queues, and 450 non-queues in our data set. And we tested the BERT model on this completely new data set from a separate, from a different healthcare system. And we got F1 score of 0.81. So it is a very, and accuracy of 0.82. So this is very comparable to the performance we got on those Encompass data set. And this also validates their generalizability of our model on the new training data collected from a different healthcare system. Next slide, please. So some people may ask why, because the BERT large language model, have a better performance, why do we still need those rules approach? So sometimes we think those models or those algorithm different approach have different, strengths and weakness. For example, the rules NLP approach is very easy to interpret. And because it's built, based on those different rules and keywords, we can easily interpret, which rule works, which rule doesn't work, right? And another reason is those rule-based NLP approach, does not require a lot of computing resources. So for those large language models, in order to run those large language models, we need, a powerful GPU or even 2 GPU to run those large language models. But, not every healthcare system or not every practice, they have those, infrastructure available to run those large language models. But of course, if the in the clinical domain, in the clinical practice, if those infrastructure is available, the BERT model have better performance, and which is recommended to for the clinical practice. And again, in the clinical setting, how can we integrate those large language model in the clinical setting is still need some discussion. For example, because we have a lot of data processing, pre-processing steps, and we have to prepare the data. So how can we apply those steps in a real clinical setting? Still need some collaboration in the practice side, and also need more research on this. Next slide, please. So here are some discussion and the limitation. As far as for the limitation, because our data is still small compared to the in practice vocabulary, the model may still biased, and it may still have a lot of space to improve. And also in our data set, we only include I think 3 therapists in our data set. So which is also represent a small number of therapists, may limit the ability of this model to generalize to other therapists. And our automated approach achieved those industry reliable standards, but we still need more research, or still need more study to investigate the generalizability, and as well as the performance of those models on different data sets. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is a conclusion, and we leveraged the language spoken by the therapist and the clients in this process. We didn't actually use those, the video part of the data set we have. And in the next few slides by Dr. Zhou, he will talk about how we leverage, the video for the analysis, and eventually want to combine both language features and the video features in those AI models. And now I'm going to turn over to Dr. Zhou.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Skidmore and Dr. Wang, for providing the background, and also explain some technical details. So in this part, actually, I'll go through it very briefly. This is first, I want to say that this part is still a work in progress. We haven't finished this part yet. And so in this part, what do we focus on is those guided gestures and directed gestures. Because those verbals from the Dr. Wang's description, you can see that the result is actually pretty good. And then when in practice, when those therapists are communicating with clients, they also use gestures. So we want to figure out those which part are the guided gesture and which part are directed gesture. So they're similar as those verbal gestures in strategy training. Guided gestures cues are preferred as well. So the task is trying to identify those gestures and give them a label. Next slide, please. And so for this part, we also need to do data preparation, and because this is a supervised machine learning, and we need to have annotated data. And this time, the annotation is done on videos, similar as the one that Dr. Wang described. The approach is actually very similar, but they will go through the video by this evaluators, trained evaluators, and two evaluators go through the videos and annotate each section of the video and give a label. And then we eventually have those video clips as 118 guided gestures and 118 directed gestures. Next slide, please. And so before we use any algorithm, we already know the challenge of this task. Because for this specific task, what we want to identify is those guided gestures and directed gestures. This has never been done in the past. In the past, what we know is that there are algorithms to recognize actions done by people. So in those research, there are a huge number of videos collected, and then with some specific actions put into categories, and then train the model. So for this are the deep learning models, and using those models, we can recognize actions taken by some person. So a person is waving or nodding or pointing to some places, or they're walking, jumping, those type of actions. And the result of those algorithms is actually pretty good. But the one what we are trying to recognize is different, because it is quite possible that the same actions may labeled as a different type of gestures in different context. I just give you one simple example is that like a therapist is pointing to something, they probably just pointing to an object and ask the client what that is. So in that case, that is not that is a directed gesture. But if they pointing to some place, but it's ask them to go to that specific place, then that will be a guided, a directed gesture. Sorry, probably I made it wrong. The previous one was a guided one, and this one is directed. So basically, that a person may have the same action, but then they the labels can be different. And also that is what we see is that many different actions may have the same label. So basically, then even before we try it, we know that the current action recognition algorithm will not perform very well in this problem. But we still want to try it to see how far it can go. Next slide, please. Yeah, because we know there are those algorithms, action recognition algorithms developed and available to use. So after we prepare the data, we want to put that into those algorithms and to see how far those algorithms can go. So what we choose to use is the Auto ML from Google, and so we prepare those videos and then also the corresponding labels, and choose a portion of them as the training set and the other portion to test the performance, and so it can generate some results. And so the Auto ML actually will predict three different labels. One is the guided gesture or directed gesture, or none. It does not produce any label at all. And from this, what we get is the average precision, and so it is 0.642. And also we specifically check the performance on guided label and directed labels. So the performance is better on the directed labels, but not that good for the guided gestures. Next slide, please. So in the next step, what we will do is that we will combine this text information with the video action recognition. So still first, what we will do is that to detect the action, because that will be the first step, and then combine that with the text information, context information, the transcripts, and also we can combine with the objects identified in the video, and to just for example, they are pointing to something, and we know what exactly they're pointing to, right? So this type of context information will improve the performance of the prediction. Thank you.
So I'll just wrap up by saying you can kind of see what our trajectory has been. We're just now starting to think about, I think I was trying to solve a problem for how do I do a 30-site trial and pay for all these raters. But I also see the potential for eventually, if we can come up with a reliable algorithm, that this could be something that many hospitals and clinics would be interested in. We're always being asked, how do I understand what the quality of my therapy is and whether I'm adhering to a particular evidence-based approach or not. We see this as being one approach that could be useful for clinics looking to evaluate that. But you can see we have some work to do to kind of nail down the multimodal elements here. The natural language processing looks pretty good. The audio is pretty good. And that's what's most developed in my research. But then taking a look at what's also going on in the environment and how that could influence understanding what's happening in that clinical interaction, that's work that's yet to be done. Stop there and take any questions or discussion items.
This is really interesting, Beth. I think there's tons of potential here. I'm wondering, like from your clinical perspective, what level of fidelity do you think would be sufficient or even acceptable in a clinical environment, like either for treatment fidelity or for even, I don't know, in different scenarios, I guess, different levels of acceptance.
In our controlled clinical trials, we've aimed for 90% and have consistently been above that. But in our real world implementation trials, we've been running those. The standard industry standard is 70%. So far, implementation trials in the kind of messy real world, we've been north of 75 or 80%. So I think our last trial was 78%, working with Encompass Health, Sewickley and that team. But the industry standard for, like, even if you look at psychotherapy trials, where they're looking at this kind of verbally mediated intervention, 70% or higher is that 0.7 or higher is what you're looking for. So the NLP team is already exceeding that. I thought a 0.8 was pretty good as a way of giving people feedback on how good their intervention is.
But so that's in the research world, but what about in the clinical practice world?
Yeah, so in the clinical practice world, the standard is 0.7.
Oh, 0.7, okay.
And let me be clear, when I say our implementation trials, all of my implementation trials have been within the clinical practice world. So we go into the hospital, we train their staff, and then we step back and we collect data and look at how well they do implementing it, as well as measuring their outcomes. And those, the messiest of those during COVID, believe it or not, was a 0.78 fidelity. So we're getting pretty good fidelity using our gold standard raters. Those were the same videos that Leming and Yanshan looked at and were able to get that 0.82 from fidelity. So their fidelity looked a little bit better than our fidelity actually with my gold standard rater. So yeah, that's pretty good. Anything above a 0.7 in a messy clinical world would be considered a high fidelity intervention.
Well, I'm thinking just having a gold standard to shoot at is a tremendous advantage when you go for commercialization, because, how do you convince someone that this is viable? You can match it up against something that's accepted.
Yeah, it's the thing that's most exciting to we're working right now with a national for-profit partner in Encompass Health. They have 150 some facilities across the nation, and they want to scale this to all their hospitals based on the data from our one pilot at one hospital. And this is the thing that would get them most excited, is some way not only for us to train, but then to do ongoing assessment of what's happening in that therapeutic encounter and seeing if there's any drift in that intervention, if that explains any drift in their outcomes. So yeah, I definitely think you're right. Like, for years, people talk about the black box of rehabilitation. And I, for one, have been trying to get rid of that language because I don't think it's a black box. I think there is some very systematic things that are happening, but now this could be evaluated with an objective standard. And I think that would give people greater confidence. Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested to hear what other people think about sort of the commercialization potential of this.
Yeah, nice presentation. I appreciate the time it took to prepare for this group. I do have a thought, first a question. So do you envision if this is commercialized that you would have some kind of a ongoing measurement of assessing that patient once home? And if you said that, I apologize for missing it, but you know, my mom goes home. My mom goes home. She's fine going home. What about 3 months later? Did the therapy she had, did she losing cognition on how to problem solve? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I can. So the intervention that the method that we're talking about here for commercialization has a lot to do with that therapist and patient interaction. And the reason why, and it's clear to me, but I didn't make clear to you, is our studies have shown that if we get that right while they're in inpatient rehab, they continue to show significant gains up to 6 and 12 months after they leave than if we don't get it right during the inpatient rehab stay. So while I think you're right, we want to monitor what's going on at home, I'd recommend other methodologies for that, some of the environmental counseling and some of the other things that members of this group are tackling. Okay. But what we're really interested in is, are we optimizing our opportunity during that therapeutic interaction while they're still in therapy? Those two, usually it's 14 to 20 days post-stroke. Are we optimizing that? Because our clinical trials have shown that if we do that really well, they don't just necessarily get better during rehab. We see a continued increase over the 12 months in improvements because they learn a skill that they can keep on applying once they leave. They become independent in the strategy training. They can do it for themselves. They're no longer reliant on a therapist to do that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that addresses the question.
And so in those other controlled trials, we have done those follow-ups where we go out and monitor them once they we've used wearable sensors, we've used video and other things, but we haven't explored that as an application for this technology.
Right. So what steps have you taken so far to think more formally about commercialization? Any? Or is this just conversation amongst the three of you, just kind of?
Yeah, we were featured in a Pitt magazine and Dave said, come talk to our group. And that's about as far as we've gone.
Well, my role at Pitt is to be, I'm an entrepreneur in residence with the Innovation Institute. So if there's any way that the Innovation Institute can be helpful, you can get to me through David. And I'd be happy to sit down and help you think through this when and if the time is right for you. Informal and formal tools for you to think about using when you're ready.
Yeah, I don't know, Yanshan and Leming, you've had some questions about that process. Do you guys, because that's your investment here, right? You want to raise those?
Yeah, sure. So we haven't, so apart from the science part, we haven't taken much further steps in terms of commercialization. I think the part is missing here is, investigation on the market. What are the, competing products or any, competing products there or service there. And second is, the business model. So I have few for my friends on the page on their startups. So it's all about, what is the current business, what the new product will, save the money for the healthcare system, that kind of thing. We haven't done any of them. And we reach out to UPMC Enterprise, a person from graduate from SHRS, who is now in UPMC Enterprise. We reach out to him, give him our idea, and then he got back to us. He said maybe the Pittsburgh Pittsburgh Health Data Alliance. I don't know if any of you
Sure.
heard about that. Yeah, he told me maybe they are, because he just told us it's just too early. So we haven't thought about, we just finished the science part. We haven't thought about the market size, the business model, all these things. So he said, the Pittsburgh Health Data Alliance may help us to, do the following steps. But yeah, that's the only comment we got.
I guess one of my questions is, so I'm just looking to solve a clinical problem. These guys are thinking about a very sophisticated way of doing that, and I think there's an investment for them to push this to commercialization, which I'm happy to support. We feel that we need to get a little bit more nailed down on the algorithm and its reproducibility and reliability before we really additional steps. But I guess we would like some counsel from you on when is the time in the scientific development to start engaging in those conversations and gathering that data. I think that's what I've heard you guys ask me. So let's ask Daniel.
Yeah, that's the ultimate it depends question, right? So I don't have a firm answer, and there's no formula. So there's two schools of thought. One is when it meets your research objectives and you're satisfied that those, in addition to the clinical objectives that you might have, when they're satisfactorily met, that's one time to say, okay, let's talk to somebody about commercialization. The other way to look at that is to say, okay, we've got these concepts, and this is a problem for me clinically here in my practice. You believe that problem is replicated through your industry. If you're thinking about commercialization, you're thinking broadly, it's the people in Dubuque, Iowa, where my mom is at. It's the people in, San Francisco. But do we really have information that says, yes, this is the same problem with enough people to make this a commercial product? Or is there going to be some benefit that they're looking for, in addition to what I have, that might say, oh, I never really thought about that? Or if I'm solving a problem for me, for my practice, for my interest, for my academic, whatever, and I need to adjust research or the technical stuff behind the project to meet that need. And then you think about that research wise, does it fit? And you're not going to do commercial research inside of the institution. But when do you ask that question? Is this a product? Well, maybe it's a product when you have your clinical needs met, or maybe you want to decide, well, maybe my clinical needs are unique or not big enough and not shared by enough people that, I need to do a broader view, a broader survey, if you will, a broader discovery of what other people in the field are experiencing as well.
Yeah, I think that aligns with our planned next step. So I'm preparing to do a study with between 30 and 40 inpatient rehab hospitals spread across the United States and includes 2 in Puerto Rico. So we'll have continental US, Alaska and Puerto Rico are part of that as well.
Cool.
And I think we could gather that information as we're doing our study. We're studying the implementation, but there'd be no reason why we couldn't gather information about what people's challenges are. And it's actually the third aim of the project is to better understand how does that differ based on region, on staffing and size of the rehab facilities. The clientele should be different. And we've picked these 35 sites to be as nationally representative, as heterogeneous as possible. We just finished a 12-month study where we assessed the readiness to deploy this intervention there. So we have a lot of information about that, but we could gather more about, what do they see are the challenges in evaluating their implementation of it. And we could get that. That would give us really robust data that we're already gathering for, similar purposes. And, related to the question that was posed in the chat, the challenges of training therapists to adopt these techniques, it's actually something that we've spent our last 15 years on. We have worked with a series of grants, NIH funded projects to develop that, working with therapists and rehab directors, as well as patients who receive the services over the last 15 years. So we have a very nice training system that we've developed in partnership with therapists, with their directors, and with patients receiving the services that we deploy through an online course that gets us high fidelity. As you can see from the one study, we get high fidelity to intervention with that approach. So we've already been tackling that problem, and I think we feel like we've got that nailed down. We've got a lot of studies that show that it's an effective training approach. But what are the regional variations, which was the original question and what Daniel posed? I think that's information we have yet to glean. I've done these studies here in Pittsburgh for 15, 16 years. We've also partnered with centers of excellence, rehab hospitals in Detroit, St. Louis, Chicago, and Charleston, South Carolina. But obviously that's not nationally representative.
Sure.
Next step is that national representation.
Yeah, very, very cool. Very cool that you're doing that. And it now's the time to add that piece that you pointed out, is what are the other challenges that might be unique, that maybe even, are different, geographically, socioeconomically, et cetera, et cetera. And you're far more fluent in that kind of questioning. So I applaud you for thinking about that. And whenever
it does beg the question, what other questions should we be asking? So that's
exactly right. And with ask the questions without leading
technology.
The
Yep.
Yeah, without leading the witness, right?
We'll do that.
I think this is a good opportunity. I think this is a good opportunity for me to put in a pitch for our innovation challenge that we're planning for next fall. That's just kind of activity that the innovation challenge is designed to promote, this customer discovery. And so next, for those of you in SHRS who are on this call, we're planning a sort of an expanded version of our innovation challenge for next fall with support from our dean's office. And so, Beth, I think this would be a great entry into that competition. You really see a high impact.
Yeah.
Yep. It's going to probably take us, we're applying to NIH for this 35 site trial. I expect that it'll be 12 to 15 months before we get that trial up and running. So we could be gathering some discovery information in the meantime through another pilot mechanism.
Any other questions for the team? This has been great. I think it's a great example of work that has potential for translation through commercialization. I really think there's a ton of potential here. So I hope you guys will take Dan up on his offer to get together with him to brainstorm on how to go forward.
We're looking forward to that.
All right. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Thanks.